Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of the Decoding Platform Rust to JS series that we've got with Matt Peterson. Welcome, Matt, again.
Hello.
Yeah, so you've been working on figuring out how to get us a JavaScript SDK with native JavaScript that does all the platform functionality. We're not quite there to get all of the functionality, but I wanted to get your update on what you've been working on since we had you on, I think, 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, in those 2 weeks, we haven't been able to kind of powwow and connect much with AJ, who has a lot of the knowledge and experience on the core side of things. Until just this morning. So we were able to have a phone call, which is why we're starting a little later today. Got some useful information, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the plan is that we'll be working together tomorrow on bringing the work that you've done back to the work that AJ's done and pulling it all together. But you've done quite a bit of work in the past couple weeks. So why don't you give us your where you're at, what you've been through, the war stories, the horror stories, the successes and the triumphs that you've had over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, so I have a personal philosophy of I'm fine with doing something manually once, but if I have to keep doing it over and over again, I really want to write code to automate it so that my work can go away. So I did some manual translation of bin code.
Oh wait, can I say something real quick and interrupt already? Because there is. You said you're okay with writing everything once. I've heard of a philosophy called dry. Don't repeat yourself. Mm-hmm. This is a software technique that says that if you are repeating yourself, that means you should probably pull this something out and make it a function. But I've also heard, so make it a function, meaning you only do it once and the function takes care of doing it the rest of the times. But I've also heard a philosophy called wet, as a word play on dry, which means write everything twice. So if you're doing something,
I would agree with that.
So you said, I don't like to do anything more than once, but the other philosophy says do it at least twice. So both dry code and wet code, right in between, right in that middle ground. But where you said you're automating it, the one thing that you did was you did the create identity transition, and then that's what you were like, okay, I kind of get what this is all about, the bin code Rust stuff, but I don't want to do this manually for the next however many there are many. So obviously you're going to have to automate it, because it's not going to be one of those cases where it's write everything twice, because there's going to be way more than twice. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, right. Like I could write everything twice, but I don't really want to write nearly identical copy and pasted structs and do the same edit macros 4,000 times or whatever for every single one of these. And then I would really like to be able to maybe keep the documentation in sync. And so anytime the documentation changes or anytime there's a new field added, I don't really want to have to be manually keeping two code bases in sync. That just sounds like torture to me. So yeah, write everything twice. I think that's totally fair. If you want to use the same code twice, but slightly differently, there's a and this is something I've experienced in my evolution as a software engineer, that if you immediately go and take the two ways and you abstract out the one way that they're different into a parameter to the function, you might be okay for those two ways, but what about the third or the fourth? Right. Is the third and the fourth ways going to have the same difference between those two, or is it going to be a different difference?
Right. So it's about avoiding hasty abstractions. Don't create an abstraction for something that you could have just done if it were twice that you had to do it. That's going to be premature abstraction, and that's probably a bad idea. But something that you're going to have to do over and over and over and over and over again, that it's time to automate.
Absolutely. So that's what I did, and I'll say I started out with thinking this would be somewhat easy, and I did a really hacky regex extraction thing that quickly turned into a nightmare, and I decided to abandon that approach last week. And I took advantage of the fact that there is a solid Rust ecosystem for parsing Rust code,
Mm.
and I went and used an actual Rust parser to extract the structs, and that was definitely the right way to go. It was much easier and less corner cases and horrible regexes. Um,
Mm.
I'm on essentially iteration 2 of the automatic code generation, um, and it is now complete as far as it is able to generate correct JavaScript. Um, I have then encountered some issues where the approach that I took ends up not being very compatible with the way that TypeScript likes to work. Um, and we're working on a JavaScript SDK, and I always like to make sure that our tools are going to be happy with the code that I'm writing. So I really wanted the generated code to have documentation stolen from the Rust code, but I wanted it to have the documentation in there. I wanted it to have like good autocomplete pop-ups, and I wanted it to have like you'd be able to uh, go to definition and there find references and so on and so forth.
Oh, I would just say that's absolutely necessary. Creating an
Right.
SDK, that's really all it's about for an amateur developer like myself, who we want to have the broadest net possible for the platform use case. So we want to attract people that are even as dumb as me with software development to be able to use the SDK and just be able to type platform dot and then auto completes all the functions, all the methods, all the things that are available on the SDK, so I don't have to look up the documentation because most developers are lazy. Plus, it makes the AI, you can train AIs easier that way. I'm assuming as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Right.
that's absolutely great. And yeah, having that all right within the code base is great. So keep going. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, do you want to go ahead and switch to showing my screen on the stream,
Yes.
and then I can show some of what this is.
Okay, you're on. Just bump up the font maybe one click.
And where did it go? I close the terminal and everything disappears. Okay. And we'll bump up the font size. All right, so this is the core of the work. This is the core uh, structure, the core message that was driving the request for me to even do this work in the first place. And this is the state transition for the Dash platform.
Okay, we're looking at a
Um,
Rust file. This is
so
Rust.
right, this is the Rust. This is the like official like accepted Rust code base for the state transition right here.
RSDP
And
source state transition. You see the breadcrumb thing there? Yeah, just point that out.
yeah,
Yep.
the state transition, there's a bunch of different options that you can use for these state transitions, and I expect that there will be more of these in the future. Um, but yeah, so in my previous work, I had manually converted the identity create transition into a JavaScript, and that was it. I didn't do any of the other ones.
Mhm.
And I got a little bit lucky, I would say. I think that the identity create transition is fairly simple. Um, some of the like data contract ones are a little bit more complicated just because they have to deal with like arbitrary recursive JavaScript values, which is kind of or like not just JavaScript, but arbitrary recursive uh, objects, which is a bit more complicated.
Right, because those are user defined, right? It's like when you
Right.
create a data contract, it's the user that's saying, "Hey, I want a top level field that's merchants, and then I want under each merchant, I want each merchant to have a location and items and prices, and under each price, I want like discount. It's arbitrarily deep structured objects that are user created.
Right. So the code that I wrote essentially goes and finds this in the Rust code, and it converts it into some equivalent JavaScript. And I can show some of what it's generating here. And I'll talk about what this is. This is going to look a little bit messy, but for the most part, you can see that this state transition has all the same different kinds of state transitions, and it refers to the details of each of these state transitions over here. So this is kind of what I was going for. I was like, can we make some JavaScript that looks pretty close to the Rust code and works the same way? That was kind of my driving goal in the beginning for what this was going to look like. And I think that in regards to that, I did a pretty good job. You know, it matches very closely to this code right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I could probably split this off to the side if we wanted to see them at the same time. You can see that, you know, all of the same things are there, and, you know, it looks a little different because the languages are different, but, you know, you can read it. You can tell what's going on really easily.
Yep. Yeah.
And then came the usability. Because we're doing this weird thing where we're creating a value and then we want to use it as a type, and TypeScript kind of doesn't like it when you do that very much. So I then started trying to figure out ways of massaging TypeScript and getting it to use it right. And I thought we were good, and I had figured out enough hacks to get it to work. And then I go to use it, and it just doesn't work. So you can see here in this pop-up how, like, it's got this weird, like, all this weird typing machinery that I had to write, and I really don't like this. I really just wish this was just like a named class. Can we just, like, say that this is a batch transition v0? And it doesn't seem like the way that I did this, at least, that TypeScript is ever going to be happy with what I did. So I still have a lot of work to do there. I need to change the way that I'm generating the types, and I probably need to generate a separate type file completely, and blah, blah, blah. So that's going to be future work. Yeah, so that's going to be future work. But I wanted to go and show then that I have what this looks like when you're actually using it. So, for example, if we wanted to,
this is code that like a normal developer that's not writing the library. This is the code that a normal developer would write in their application code.
Right. So this is JavaScript. This is something that you could, in theory, run in the browser or in Node.js or whatever. And again, this is just I putting this proof of concept together. This code doesn't actually work yet, but this is what it will look like. And you can see that it is like finding the types. And what's fun is that for some of these, it'll actually have, let me see if I can find one of them. So like this one right here, it actually has the text from the documentation that was in the Rust code base. So some of this is working nicely. But I need some more work to get it to work on everything. But yeah, so this is like what using the generated code will look like.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm noticing that this is the state transition for identity create, which is an odd beast. It's different than most because it involves creating core transactions as well. So that's something that, again, we're going to be working with AJ on. But
yeah, so we should be able to at this point go to here, and we can create a new data contract, for example. So we could do like db.statetransition data contract create, and then we can do a db.
Wait, can you slow down just a little bit and back up to state transition? I want to see what the, like, because it's all about developer experience. That's the whole purpose behind this whole work. So when you say db.statetransition. And then it brings up this list. That's what we're talking about. I'm talking about, I'm saying, I'm kind of going into some of these details for some of the less technical people in the audience that are interested, but maybe aren't coders themselves.
Right.
When you type the dot, if you're working with a library that's not aware of TypeScript, which is JavaScript with types, that give you this autocomplete stuff, that's very difficult. And the whole purpose here is to make this developer experience really good so that it's self-documenting. So I just wanted to.
So if I didn't, so I put a typo in here just to give an example of like what it would look like without types. what
Yeah.
it would look like with a bad developer experience.
Yep.
The best the editor can do is give me a huge list of all of the words. And that's it. This is not relevant. There is no .core transition. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. The ABC prefix icon says this is just the editor trying to figure out through some other heuristics that this might be the word that you want next, but it has nothing to do with what the library actually supports.
Right. And so with the types that I've been adding, you actually get, there's a little bit of extra stuff going on that you can ignore, and I will hopefully be able to get rid of. But
Mm-hmm.
like for me, the thing is always like I want to make a new data transaction or a data contract. Is
Yep.
it called create data contract? Is it called make data contract? Is it called data contract new? Is it called something weird? I have no idea what it's called, and I don't remember the exact word very
Mm-hmm.
well. So having it pop up and being able to type in, say it was a data contract something. Oh yeah, it's right there, data contract create.
Yep.
And then fill that in, and then this is horrible, and I need to fix this still. But db data transaction or data contract create
Mm-hmm.
transition. Um, And then this is going to give me a version 0. And then we do db.data contract create transition v0, which I know that's ugly, but that's just the way that this is designed.
Yep.
And then here, now that we have this, and again, this is terrible, but you can see we have data contract here. So we need to use a data contract in the serialization format, and blah blah blah. So this is like it just gives us a list of all the things we need to fill in, and it will eventually show any documentation that happens to be attached to any of these.
Yeah, and I realized that like this is going to be there were some parts in that string of characters that you were typing that would be difficult for somebody to follow if they didn't really know the inner workings of platform. So there will probably still be some work to be done on abstracting it to the level of somebody can use it that's less familiar, but at
Yes.
least this gives something like a library author full control over the actual API, and then they can create whatever abstractions they want. So it
Right.
does help in that sense for sure.
So yeah, this will probably not. I mean, maybe it will be. Maybe if I do a good enough job, this will become part of the public,
Public.
commonly used, um, like SDK. Uh, More than likely, most of this will be end up just internal to some like higher level API.
Mhm.
But it will make that SDK easier to write and easier to
Exactly.
verify and easier to make sure that it is correct.
And it also
So,
gives users, let's say we create an abstraction that says like SDK, or you can use whatever namespace you want, like dash dot platform dot something else, and you can create an abstraction like that makes it easier for you to create these transitions. But at least then for the more technical people, they could drop down into the lower level API if they wanted to and needed to. But you can create an abstraction that makes it easier for those who don't want to do that.
exactly. And maybe the SDK doesn't support some bleeding edge new feature. So somebody's going to want to grab this bin codable stuff that can be automatically generated, and they can tap into the SDK's backdoor and they can say, hey, just pass on this raw transition, please. And that'll still be an option.
Okay. Okay, so then you've filled in some data here, just
Yeah. So these are all the keys that are required for this data contract create transition v0. Um, uh, so we can see that like the key ID is a number. So again, we can just I don't know. This is still just me messing around. So this is not like an actual useful transaction yet, but um, so we need to do like this is another signature. So we grab one of these. Um,
Yeah, and I can imagine that we would have to, like, you're not going to want this level of detail for
Absolutely not.
SDK, but this is the low level that you need to create in order to make the SDK that you want.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I will just say, from a high level, product management and perspective, being able to cover the whole surface area of the API that's available in native JavaScript using some code generation, it does seem like that's better than I expected to be able to get to at this phase. Now we still don't have. You could have easily manually written the ability to create a data contract, and then a document against that data contract, but then we would have to manually do all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So you're further along. You're both further along and less further along in different respects than I
Mm-hmm.
expected. So I'm like super excited about the ability that you've created through the code generation to be able to cover the whole surface area. And I think that, like, having these types available is awesome. So, but what kind of what do you see as the path forward now that you've essentially got all the bin code auto generated? What do you think is the path forward now, or did you want to say something else before I got to that question?
No, so AJ's been working a lot on his SDK and ideas for this. Uh, it doesn't look like there is much of an actual API surface for this SDK yet, so we don't really know what it's going to look like yet.
Mhm.
So I will probably have to work with this. I don't know how AJ likes to work. I would say that if it was me, I would start by making some proof of concept applications or command line tools or websites or something that uses this code. Like, let's say that we want to make just some really basic UI that allows you to create new data contracts and new identities, and then or new identities, and then attach the data contracts to those, and then create objects on those. Let's make something simple. Let's use this code, and then I would start with kind of like what we were talking about earlier, where you want to write everything twice. I would start trying to use this code, and then when I get annoyed at the 42 lines of bin code garbage that I have to keep copying and pasting, I would start looking at the different places I used it, and I would pull those out into a function, and I would try to document how that was used, and I would start building it up from there. That's kind of a bottom up approach. There's other top down approaches that could be used as well. um, I can't say that I'm too familiar with actually using Dash in this way, so I think I can comment further on that, but that's the general approach I would take.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, again, as somebody that's looking more toward the product market fit and less into the details of the coding, I I think that we need the SDK to be something that both gives the high level and the low level control. So the ease of high level abstractions, but with also the control of low level, fully complete API surface. And like we were hoping, at least I was hoping that we could have some kind of demo that showed us creating an identity and a data contract and then a document against that data contract today. But you went further in I can cover the whole API surface area through code generation, but haven't got quite to that point where we can do the automated simple use case yet. But yeah, I think that you're right that we should start with those use cases, because there's going to be like five things that you want to do, and that will cover 90% of your use cases that you want to cover. like creating the identity, creating the data contract, creating a document. Maybe then that's three things. And then after that would be doing the CRUD operations on documents. So
Mm-hmm.
create, read, update, delete, so that you can then edit your documents and things like that, and then create good abstractions for those very common things, and just create them as use cases need them. But at the end of the day, uh, the product should the product should cater towards somebody who is not really even necessarily into cryptocurrency or blockchains, but somebody that just wants to be able to have a global store for data and doesn't want to register and sign up for um, a big cloud company that's going to lock them in and sell all their data or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why
Yes.
people might not want to use Google Clouds, like Google's and Microsoft and those kind of things. A they want a cloud service that's permissionless and all the things that blockchains are. And so that's the use case that I'm kind of going for, is trying to get Web 2 developers to see, like, hey, it can be easier to write an application that has global storage than some of the SDKs that are out there built by VC companies that want to extract and lock you into their service. That's the high level product use case that I'm going for. So somebody, well, Web3 dopamine, we know this guy. He says, nice. I'm using this SDK. I think he means I'm going to use this SDK, because this SDK doesn't exist yet. However, he might be referring to the other SDK that he's using. I'm not sure. So comment if you're actually using the SDK. You're probably using the current JavaScript SDK, Web3 dopamine. I'm pretty sure that Web3 dopamine is the guy that's building the Transaction Street Explorer. So anyway, let us know if you want to use this SDK, or if you're using the current SDK right now. So another high level thing is the current SDK is clocking in at many megabytes. Matt, what do you think this SDK will land at in your estimation in terms of size?
Oh man, that's a really hard question. I do want to mention that the way that my code works is different than a typical code generator.
Okay.
So like this is about the size of the struct in Rust. It's very tiny. Um, uh, the way that the WASM, the WebAssembly version of this is generating, there is code that is going to be custom generated specifically for this one struct, that is going to be like calling functions and spitting out data into into some kind of byte array, right? And so the way that Rust works, every single one of these messages is going to have a chunk of code to encode and decode it on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
This code, this is all that you get. This is all the code that you need for encoding and decoding this entire struct. You don't have to have that duplicated code, because it all happens at runtime. So this like specifically is like the instructions for the serializing. It's like go and decode this field first, and then go and decode this field, and then go and decode this field, and then go and decode this field.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of benefit from that, which is why I was trying to go with this route. By significantly shrinking the amount of code that we have to worry about.
What I'm seeing is 4,000 lines of code that looks like it's 90% down to the bottom or so.
Yeah, but
what's the size of this code? What's the size of this file so far?
Give you some idea, there's still a lot of junk in here that is like I need to clean up still. So there's like a good 1,000 lines of just comments, and then there's a whole bunch of type stuff too. These are just comments as well. So when this is delivered to the browser, all of these comments will be stripped out,
Mm.
and you can even do some clever things like the way that a lot of these things are built. They will do tree shaking. I don't know how tree shakeable this is, but like for example, if you're using the state transitions, we might be able to make it so that if you only are creating data contracts and you're not creating identities, that the code for the identity crate just doesn't even exist in your final downloaded code.
Mhm.
So this looks like a lot of code, but you got to remember that like all of this will go away. Most of this will not be sent to the browser.
It doesn't look like a
Um,
lot to me. I would estimate this is hundreds of kilobytes, if not less, uh,
yeah,
in
certainly.
the end,
And
rather
then
than
like
mega.
the whole support library for this is like less than 1,000 lines of code. And that's like there's a bunch of duplication that I still need to get rid of here. Like there's two different ways of encoding structs based on whether it's named or not named and stuff like that. So, but yeah, this whole support library is only 1,000 lines, and then all of the like generated struct definitions. And something we were talking about here is that this also includes a lot of the stuff from the core library, which I will be looking into removing and then relying on AJ's handwritten JavaScript instead. So like maybe a third of this is going to go away. Um, but
Yeah.
anyway, yes. So to say that, like, we're not looking at very much. Like, what do we have? It's not going to show me because I'm too far zoomed in. Um, but I would say there's like maybe 50 kilobytes or so of just like raw text in here, and that'll shrink down to like maybe 10 kilobytes just in this file alone. Um,
Okay.
and again, this is the low level, so then the SDK on top of that is going to add a little bit more.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I'd say we're looking into the hundreds of kilobytes range for this, uh, based on very very rough guesses.
Yeah, and another thing that uh, improvement with this is it. I'm hoping that this makes debugging a lot easier as well, because when you're debugging Rust, when you're debugging code that's generated um, from WASM, I don't think that that's going to be very easy. But if it's just JavaScript, the browser and you're in the browser, right? So you're building an application. It's a web-based application, and there's some issue with the network, and it sends you some error code from the network. It's going to be a lot easier to stack trace and drill down into where the issue was if you're just dealing with actual JavaScript code instead of um, bytecode, as far as I can tell. You have any comments to add about that, or do you have experience with debugging SDKs, applications that use SDKs that are derived from WASM?
I have not. I have never tried to do debugging anything running in WASM.
Okay.
I can't really comment on that. I do want to mention, however, um, if you are encountering bugs in the SDK that's written in Rust, you maybe want to go and write some tests and then use a standard Rust ecosystem to try to debug those. Um, uh, you're going to want to be fixing those bugs in Rust. You're going to want to be adding, print statements to the stuff in Rust.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you could do that in the browser. I don't think that that is a good idea for the reasons you mentioned. The debugging experience is probably better than I'm expecting, but there's always going to be some disconnect between the browser and your debugger.
Yeah, what I'm referring to is an application developer,
But an
somebody.
application developer should never be encountering bugs in the SDK.
Under
And the stack traces should
there
still
will
pop
be.
out into their code and point out exactly where their code is having problems.
Exactly. And so if you have a bug in your code and it's because it's actually in the SDK, what I'm saying is
Hmm.
um, your application code can try to surface those bugs, but if it's deep down into the WASM code, I don't know if it's, I don't know how useful I really actually don't know how uh, easy it will be for an application developer to be able to say, like post on the Dash Discord or make a GitHub issue that says, "Hey, I'm having this issue and it's at this place. Is there something that's wrong with my code, or is it something that's wrong in the SDK?" I don't know which will be easier for that application developer or the Dash developers to receive that issue. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that personally it would be easier to be able to step through and see like the stack trace of just JavaScript codes. But once it goes into like WASM bytecode, that's where I would throw my hands up as an application developer and say, I don't even know what's wrong with this.
You will not be seeing WASM bytecode in the stack trace or in your debugging. If you're at that level, you're doing it wrong.
Even with an SDK that
Again,
WASM?
yes. Again, I can't comment on this because I've never actually tried debugging anything in WebAssembly. However, I do know that a lot of other people are. And a lot of other people are like compiling entire 3D rendering engines or 3D game engines and running them in WebAssembly. There are people far smarter at this doing, I'm sure, their best job at doing this. The other thing I would mention, rewind is what it's called when you have an exception. You're trying to rewind the function calls and you're recording where all the function calls were in the stack as you're building your stack trace.
Mm-hmm.
Rewinding code is tends to be pretty expensive. Adds a lot of size to the WebAssembly. So frequently, what I've seen happen is they will create a production binary which has most of the debugging capabilities removed. And so if something does happen, you're going to get no useful information out of it whatsoever when you're running it that way. Same. This is nothing new. If you're running Rust in native or in release mode, plain vanilla Rust in release mode, not with WebAssembly, you're going to have the same exact issues.
Yeah.
But I would expect that if you switch to debug mode and you run the same thing and you get a stack trace, I would bet that Rust is going to be packaging up that stack trace, handing it across the WebAssembly border, and then it's going to be part of the error that gets then thrown into JavaScript. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll probably still get a Rust stack
You'll
trace.
probably still get it. Okay. Yeah.
Even in a WebAssembly built version of the SDK.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of unknowns with the debugging experience. The main, I think the main driver from my perspective is size. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're trying to get, and just developer experience with being able to get the auto completes. Those are the two main things. Is an
I would
SDK
agree.
gives you very good autocomplete and typings, as well as is just very small because we want to be able to put this in all kinds of environments. I do have this sneaky suspicion that having WASM code in certain environments is going to be problematic, where just having JS would not be problematic.
I
So
don't know if this is still the case, so take this with a grain of salt, but I have heard that React Native, which is a very common JavaScript framework for building mobile applications,
mhm.
does not like WebAssembly. And again, this may be a historical artifact, so I don't know for sure, but um, uh, that's just an example of like on the phone, if you're writing an application, you're going to want a non-native SDK. You're going to want a JavaScript native SDK, not something that's WebAssembly. There's
Yeah.
also something to be said for the whole mobile side in general. A large number of people don't even have laptops and use everything from their phone.
Mm-hmm.
And those people in particular are going to have really limited mobile devices with probably bad internet. So you're not going to want to be shoveling large amounts of code over to their phone to run on their tiny browser. Even if you did, then it's going to take up a lot of like system memory on the phone itself, which means that anytime you switch to your text messages, you switch back, you're going to probably lose that context and have to reload everything, and it's going to be an annoying experience. Nobody's going to want to use those applications if the amount of code that they're having to load is huge. So I would say, especially when it comes to very fast loading websites and mobile devices in particular, size is a huge deal.
Yeah. And that filters down through just not only the DX, but the UX, the user experience. And I just want to have the best possible scenario so that there's no excuses other than I just hate cryptocurrency for people to want to use the SDK. So yeah, I think that there's this just my gut feel is having something native in JavaScript is going to open up the field to a much wider audience that will be open to using something like this. And that's the whole purpose here. So, but let's get back into your code base. We've gone for 40 minutes. I don't know how much more there is to say, but can you give us, just what else do you have to share in terms of like your experience, what you foresee as issues or problems that might be coming up in the roadmap, concerns, things that you're excited about? What else do you want to say?
That's a good question. I just want to say that, like, I know that I'm showing code. This is the example of what I have been working on as the auto generation of this. This will not be there. This is stuff that I'm going to be removing because TypeScript does not like it and because the developer experience here is bad. So I just wanted to mention that, like, this has a lot of improvement to go, and I very much want to get something nice looking and something that I can feed into a documentation generator so that we can have like a documentation website for the underlying protocol that's part of that Dash runs on for all of these different kinds of messages and transitions. So this is not the end. This is not done, and I hope to have some better something better to share next time.
Okay, well, like I said, it looks like you've made a lot of progress. It's now just getting it back to the simple use case demonstration that we want to do, using this as a base now instead of the previous demo that we did with AJ, where he was creating an identity, but he was using your hand cobbled up bin code library at the time. Now we're going to move on to using this auto-generated library and do further use cases beyond just identity create. So that's kind of the roadmap ahead. We may, in terms of future shows, I may have AJ on Monday. AJ hasn't been on Incubator Weekly since like several months ago, but he might have something to show on Monday. So look forward to that. That's just a possibility. I'm not quite sure about that, but he has pivoted back to looking at some Dash stuff after having been away from Dash doing some other client work. So I'm looking forward to having him back and being able to help you, Matt, on what you're working on, because they are definitely related, intertwined and related. And so, yeah, with that, thanks to everybody for joining in, and we'll catch you either Monday or, if not Monday, Wednesday next week. Bye.
All right, bye.